Hello and welcome. This is your host, Garima. And joining me on the dais today is Sinnott, founder of Witting Partners and host of the Energy Detox podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today, Joe. It's a pleasure to have you here with me.
Very happy to be here, Garima.
Joe, let's begin with your story. Help me understand your roots, your background, your family, and how has your career path been so far?
All right. Well, I guess starting with my roots, I'm from New Jersey, state of New Jersey here in the United States, which is one of the only state, actually the only state right now where it's against the law to pump your own gasoline. So needless to say, my roots are in a state that is not exactly consistent with the oil and gas industry.
Right.
I grew up there. I went to school, the University of Notre Dame, where I got a chemical engineering degree. And I'll say that my vision of what a chemical engineer would do after graduation is certainly not what I wound up doing. So long story short, I was offered a job with Schlumberger a couple months before graduation and had the opportunity to go and jump into an industry, again, I knew nothing about, and I took that opportunity. So I wound up working offshore on drilling rigs in the Gulf of Mexico as a field engineer and spent 3 years there. From there, moved up to Pittsburgh, where I worked for EQT, which has since become the largest producer of natural gas in the United States. Left EQT last year and am now an executive coach at my own business, which, as you said at the intro, is Witting Partners.
Right.
As far as family goes, I have 4 children, 5 and an 8-year-old, and a pair of 2-year-old twins, and here with my wife in Pittsburgh, where I've been now for over 12 years. And, you know, moving forward in the industry, again, certainly in a manner very different from how I had been moving forward for the prior 15 years. And, you know, the short answer to your question is, you know, all of those things have been great for me. Life has been great to me, and I've certainly been very blessed to get to the point that I'm at right now.
Amazing, amazing. And Joe, before we dive deep into your journey in the oil and gas industry, I would like to understand your why behind this, because everyone has this unique inspiration, unique motivation for joining the industry. Did you have any thoughts, any such motivation before coming into this landscape, or was it just a matter of chance you wanted to take up this opportunity? What was it like for you?
I would say it was definitely a matter of chance. If not, I think desperation's a bit too strong, but I think it was a matter of being offered a job, having the prospect of gaining some certainty, and really not having any reason not to jump on it. So, you know, I didn't have anything holding me back when Schlumberger made the offer. I suppose I had a sense of adventure to a certain extent. I didn't even know exactly where I would be going.
Right.
And certainly I didn't know what I would be doing. I didn't know much about the industry. Again, you know, jokingly coming from a world where I didn't even have to pump my own gas growing up, you know, this was completely foreign. And so it was chance, it was blind luck, if you will. But it definitely, it was consistent in a lot of ways, though, with, again, I think my desire to work hard and do something new and exciting and maybe take some risks and not knowing exactly what I would be getting into.
Wonderful. And going by your experience, your time in this landscape, what do you really think that sets this industry apart from the rest? What does really differentiate this sector from the other industries out there?
So I think one thing that sets this industry apart is its impact on the world for the last, 160 years. You know, obviously there's plenty of industries that have made a big impact on the world. Certainly healthcare, it'd be tough to top them. But I mean, for me, when you think about how much is tied to the oil and gas industry and to the energy industry in a more general sense, you know, I think it's impossible to overstate the enabling that it has had for other innovations and for life and for health and for growth and for development. So I think that's one of the biggest differentiators, is that it's tied in so many ways to so many different things. And, clearly if you just shut it off, you'd have, you'd be winding the clock back, probably not 160 years, but probably 300 years, if not more, just because of how big of an impact and how dependent we've become on the
Absolutely.
petroleum industry.
Yes, yes. And also help me understand the different roles that you have taken up in this industry, and what have been some of the challenges and opportunities associated with each one of them.
Sure. Well, I think starting at the beginning as a field engineer who knew nothing about what I would be doing, the initial challenge is forming relationships and building trust with people who know that you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
And I think on the fortunate side, there's so many people, certainly in that environment, starting off with Schlumberger, that are in the same boat that you are, literally in some cases when you're floating offshore, or people that have been, recently in that boat and are moving up. So, I had that support, but at the same time, you're fighting that ignorance that you carry with you, that imposter syndrome at some times, and that carries through really to a lot of my different roles. So, I've spent time in drilling, I've spent time in completions, I've spent time, managing reserves, I've spent time, managing teams that deal with the logistics. And, in each one of those steps, I was far from being an expert. In many cases, I jumped in completely ignorant. So at each step, it's again, dealing sometimes with that imposter syndrome. And then I think as I took on more responsibilities and you jump into a leadership role in an area that you don't understand,
Right.
again, it's really setting aside the fact that, look, you don't need to know everything that's going on. At some point, your job is to manage people and to surround yourselves with people that do, and to build those relationships. So I think, early on, certainly in earlier leadership positions, that was more of a challenge. And then you come to realize, the best ways to form those relationships, and to, again, recognize what you don't know and find ways to still keep making progress and contributing, even though you're not an expert in your field necessarily.
Absolutely. And if you had to describe the offshore world to the people outside the industry, and especially the younger generation who is keen on joining this sector, how would you describe that to them? What skills do really make a difference here, and what would really help them make their mark?
Well, I think at times, if I was being a little dishonest, I would try to sell the idea of working offshore as the closest thing you can get to being an astronaut. Obviously, I think slightly different roles and slightly different importance, but in many ways, you have to be able to be out in the middle of nowhere and, work with the tools that are out there. And, obviously it's not quite as isolating as being in outer space, but, there's an element of saying, look, this is where I am. It's a pretty intense environment. There's a pretty precise environment at times. And, if you can't handle that pressure, and if you can't handle, the isolation, and if you can't form really good relationships with the limited people that you're going to be working with day in and day out, it could be a struggle. So I think, again, maybe not the best parallel, but I will admit to have used that at times in the limited recruiting that I did with Schlumberger.
Right.
Beyond that, I think, again, maybe sticking with the space analogies, being in outer space, it gives you time to reflect. I think you get some awesome views at times of things, and being offshore could be the same thing. There's a serenity at times, there's a peacefulness, when things aren't going completely crazy. And it balances the day-to-day pressures of keeping at times several $100,000 a day operation moving forward. So, again, that's probably what I would say, is that if you can envision yourself in that environment, then, maybe working offshore isn't for you, but the benefits, if you can do it, and if you can deal with that intensity, and, again, be able to lean on the relationships that you really have to form with others to be safe and to get your job done, and to withstand the pressures of company men who are breathing down your neck, because, again, time is very much money in that environment.
Right. Right.
You're gonna have a pretty solid foundation for whatever you move on to, if and when you move past the offshore environment.
Absolutely. And amidst this backdrop, how important a role does our families play? How important your family has played a role in this scenario? Would you say that it's so important to have a strong support system back home, because everything out there is so unprecedented, so difficult, so challenging, and there is always something back home to hold on to? What are your thoughts on this, and how has your personal experience been through this?
Hmm. So, so it's an interesting question for me because when I was offshore for only 3 years, I didn't have a family. So I didn't have anything that was competing for my attention, if you will, or certainly
Right,
nothing competing to the
right.
degree that a wife and children would. But I was spending a lot of time with men and women who did have families on shore. And, to be in close quarters with them and, hearing them talk very openly about some of the challenges that come with it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, you're sitting next to them and they're having a conversation with their wife or children at home. I'm hearing this as somebody in my early 20s, again, without kids, without a wife. And, you begin to appreciate that this is why they're out there, and that, that is an important piece of driving them forward. And I would argue, after I was done with Schlumberger and after I
Mm-hmm.
stopped working offshore and I moved to Pittsburgh and had a quote more normal job,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, it was clear that once I did have a family, that is what kept me going. I mean, there's
Right,
times where, the challenges of any job can be overwhelming, but that having that purpose, having that motivation was huge. And it's funny now, again, looking back on those conversations and those times, sitting with people who were trying to foster their relationships for the 2 or 3 weeks that they were sitting offshore with their loved ones at home. I look back on that now and realize how fortunate I've been to largely be able to come home each night and be with my family. And of course now in current times, it's not just coming home at night, but it's here 24/7. And
absolutely.
and really appreciate that that there's men and women out there, and certainly in war zones or in outer space, who who really have that balance, but also have that real purpose that underscores and is a foundation for really all the time and effort they put into their work.
Right, right. And Joe, a lot of young people out there are also curious about this whole concept of work-life balance when it comes to the oil and gas industry. They have a feeling that the balance completely goes off when you're working offshore. What are your thoughts on this if we talk about the early years of one's career? How important it is to think about work life balance at that point of time, when someone would argue that your focus should be about growing, your focus should be on building your career, learning new skills, and not really think about getting some time to rest. But this is an ongoing debate. This is an argument that we have been having for quite some time now. And when it comes to the oil and gas industry, I would like to understand your perspective, because you started your career in there, and now you have come a long way. How do you look back on the early years of your career?
So I think for one, I would say that it's important to be wary of false choices.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it feels like you need to choose between, having time to myself and having that balance and, working as hard as I possibly could to move up and move forward and be able to, progress in my career. And I think the reality is, if you're looking longer term, so even if, as I was, even if you don't currently have a wife and children to be balancing, if you will, if that's part of your overall goal, purpose, vision, whatever you want to call it, if your ultimate goal is to have a family and to support that family or whatever it is, and if you're in a position where that family doesn't even exist yet, but you can sort of tie what you're currently doing to that, it makes it a lot easier
Right,
to
right.
jump 95% into work and maybe not be balanced for that period of
Mm-hmm.
time, and not feel like you're getting people talking on one end saying you got to balance, you're going to burn out, yeah, I know you're only 22 or 23, but you got to slow down. And that can be dangerous. But at the same time, you also have people that are saying, no, you're this is the time to work your butt off. But again, the reality is if you can look 5, 10 years down the road, and you don't have to have specifics and say, I'm going to live in, X house in this city and have 2.5 kids. But if you have a sense of that, I think it makes it a lot easier to make those decisions and recognize that a lot of times those are false choices. So yeah, I took advantage of the 3 years that I was there and I had no competing priorities. And I did work my butt off and it was great. And I learned probably a lot more than I had than if I was constantly looking for ways to, balance my life, just because I read a book that said that, that was the key to happiness and sustainability, if you will.
Right, right. And now, Joe, help me understand the inspiration behind Witting Partners. What is the story of this organization, and how has the transition been for you, leaving a regular job and starting something of your own? How has that been for you?
Well, I think the inspiration, and maybe it's more a case of motivation, was the fact that, I knew last year that I would be losing my job. So I had been at a very stable 130-year-old company for 11 years. And I knew that thanks to some changes in management that and unfortunately, it turned out to be about 200 other folks, would be losing their jobs in a couple months.
Right.
So the motivation was, I needed to do something different.
Right.
And I think the inspiration to do this was, for one, I had experienced directly the results of executive coaching. So I was privileged 2 years prior to all of this happening to have had a coach, which I don't even know if I appreciated fully at the time how impactful he was on not just my career, but my personal life and my overall well-being. And so, I had this idea that coaching was valuable. I also knew that my wife had a coach for a couple months following the birth of our twins, again, just to kind of gain some life back and clarity and focus. And I saw the impact that it had had on her. And when I began asking, well, how could I move on to something that is fulfilling, of course? How could I move on to something that leverages what I had been doing for so many years prior? And how could I do something that's, not just going to be able to help others, but also help me, again, sustain some level of success that I had tasted.
Right.
And, sparing you all of the details of the aha moment when that happened, it became crystal clear that executive coaching, and particularly with a focus on, the people or the types of people that I had been working with, that I had been for the last several years, was something that I wanted to pursue, and that, if I can make it work, if I can make a living out of it, could be, transformative and fantastic. So again, I think to answer what the second part of your question was, it's been great. It's been good. It's been, very much what I had hoped and if not expected it to be.
Absolutely. And Joe, there's one thing that I really want to ask you at this point of time. There's so many people who are talking about their layoffs recently, and there is this emotional setback associated with that. And what would be your message for them? What should they really hold on to at this point of time and not feel demotivated or dejected, considering how cyclical this industry is? What would be your message for them at this point of time?
Well, one of the messages is really going back to what I said before, which is if you have a long-term view, it makes it a lot easier to process some of the emotions and the disappointment, if you will, and the frustrations and surprise in some cases if people, had been moving along nicely and didn't expect to lose their job. So if you could fall back on, doesn't have to be complicated, but, a handful of things that are still there, that are still important to you and that haven't changed, just because you might be in a tight spot. If you're starting at that point, then it makes it a lot easier to think about next steps. But as soon as you, I want to say, maybe focus too much on the specifics and the logistics of, I had a job, I had a paycheck, I had this career, and now it's not there, it's too easy to say, okay, well, how do I get it back? Or do I do something else? And you start going through all these things, and it's easy to lose sight of, again, those handful of things that, should be, driving all of this and are far more important than just your career and just your paycheck. So that's the starting point is think big picture, think longer term, figure out what's most important. And now you can look at all those things. Now you can look at your career. Now you can look at the financial realities that you might be dealing with, you know, without jumping straight into the weeds and you know, maybe risking being a little more panicked than you need to be.
That's definitely a very, very strong and inspiring message, considering the crucial times we are in. And moving on, Joe, tell me about the Energy Detox podcast. What values, philosophies, and thoughts that are there that you intend to bring on the table with this podcast? What is that fundamental message that you want to spread through this platform?
Sure. Well, the fundamental message of the Energy Detox is we, as leaders, and again, we're leading, whether we're just leading our individual lives or we're leading teams or we're leading families or we're leading, you know, large organizations, at the end of the day, we have a pretty finite amount of energy.
Right.
And if that energy turns negative, and if it's toxic in some cases, which is true in many cases, sometimes in corporate environments and high pressure environments, it can really be draining, and it's going to prevent you from sustaining whatever success you've already achieved. So the
Right.
purpose of the Energy Detox is to, one, help people identify times where their energy is being drained and where, you know, things especially that they don't see are you know, are completely depleting what they have to offer. And through the Energy Detox, which again, I bill as a leadership podcast that certainly ties in lots of oil field themes and analogies and speaks largely to people who are in the oil and gas industry. You know, through this podcast, my hope is to help boost people's awareness of some of the things that they might be doing, or that, you know, some of the people around them might be doing, that are, again, draining their energy, and giving them a chance, giving them some questions to ask themselves to help boost that energy, to cleanse it, if you will, and to move forward and apply it in a way that, you know, is going to allow them to be better leaders, to be more sustainable leaders, and to make a bigger impact on really all their stakeholders, their surroundings, their community, their company. So again, maybe a bit of a long-winded answer, but, you know, it's very much leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much identifying the fact that we don't have unlimited energy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of often very simple things that could be done to put your energy to better use for, again, you and those who are dependent on you.
Right, right. Is that where the name comes from, Energy Detox? That's such an interesting name, I would say, and you have aptly described the story behind it. And I'm so glad that you're doing this. And I also want to understand, what are some of the barriers that you would like to detox when we talk about the idea of success, the idea of leadership? What are those elements that you perceive as barriers in this road?
Mhm. One of the things that I've seen the most in working with people
Mm-hmm.
is this tendency to want to make the right choice, the perfect choice. And that is very much a barrier, because the reality is that life in general, and certainly in business in a lot of ways, is it's a statistical game. And, you know, you're going to make the best choice possible. You're going to make the choice that, you know, is most likely to get the outcome you want, but there's no guarantee. And, you know, sometimes when people are faced with difficult choices, again, going back to people who are in transition and looking at jobs, you know, there's a tendency to want to make that perfect choice. And if it doesn't work out, to put all the blame on yourself. But if you've made an informed decision, and if you've done your homework and you're asking the right questions, then you make a decision and you move on. And for people who are unable to do that for any number of reasons, and I've certainly been in that position myself, that is one of the biggest barriers to sustainability, because it's not sustainable to put all of your energy into a decision that still might not turn out as you had hoped. So, you know, make a decision, you know, be agile, if you will, and move on in some cases. And, you know, that's one of the things that I find myself speaking about a lot, and weaving into a lot of different episodes on the Energy Detox. And it's certainly something that comes up a lot in, you know, my one-on-ones with people who are, you know, facing a lot of decisions right now.
Right, right. And Joe, do you think the industry people are able to tell the right story about this landscape, considering the unfair amount of debate and arguments that surround our sector with respect to climate change, or the things they are contributing to in environmental degradation. What do you think is important at this point of time, and who should take the responsibility for telling the right story? Because there are things happening, there are things beyond our control, but there is also so much that the industry is doing to rebuild and recreate uh, things in the environment. What is your take on this?
Well, I think, again, a couple of questions in there. The overarching theme that I see is that for the most part, people aren't as armed and ready to defend the industry as they could and should be.
Mm-hmm.
As far as your question of who should be maybe defending the industry, if not, going on the offensive and telling the world, all of the benefits of what we do and all of the, improvements that we've made over the last, again, 10 years, if not 160 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think it definitely starts at the top. It starts with leaders. And, I think we're in an environment here, no pun intended, where there's a lot of confusion, and you have a lot of companies publicly who are understandably embracing sustainability and all of the ESG pressures.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, sometimes the language they're using and, the approach they're taking comes across as a 180-degree turn. And it's almost like they're turning their backs on all of the men and women and efforts, positive efforts that people have put forth. So I think, leaders who can stand up and say, we are doing all these positive things. We're going to look here. We're going to keep moving forward and making a positive environmental impact. And we're going to explore these different things. And we're going to try to diversify. And we're going to support the energy transition. None of that is inherently bad, but it could definitely be dangerous
Mm-hmm.
for a workforce who's put so much time and energy and who largely knows that the energy industry is a net positive, has been a undeniable net positive for the world. So again, I might be going off on a tangent, and certainly, again, these themes come across a lot in a lot of episodes. The name, the Energy Detox, it's not an accident that it conjures up this environmental movement, which again is positive. But to your point, there's so much negativity and toxicity in the way that people try to make these, again, false choices, like I talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
It's a false choice to say that, you can either be green and environmentally conscious, or you can still rely on fossil fuels. Clearly, the answer is in between, but, much like politics, you don't get those in between answers. So I think, to maybe wrap up this long answer here, the more that leaders can present both sides and not have to feel like they're always just on the defensive to the extent that they're promoting oil and gas, that they can say, look, no, we're there. We're reducing greenhouse gases. Natural gas, certainly, being here in Appalachia and in the center of the Marcellus, natural gas has had a incredible impact on the reduction in greenhouse gases.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some leaders here, in this area who have been very proactive. And I think that's good. And I think, the more that they do that, the easier it is to arm their workforce and younger people that might be interested, who might not be hearing this positive message.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to, if the leaders aren't public about it,
Mm-hmm.
if it's just them feeding internal memos and, educating people, the impact that it's going to have is going to be, tiny compared to leaders that can stand up and say, look, this conversation is unnecessarily polarizing.
Right.
The answer's in between, or we admit that we don't know the exact answer. We don't have all the equations. We don't know, the all-in costs of, some of these green technologies. We know they're going to get better. We know that innovation is going to drive them forward. But, let's talk about some of the things we do know that are negative and that are not solved in terms of, the impact that, batteries will have, and mining for rare earth minerals are going to have from a society standpoint, and all these other things that come about that, if you're taking one side or the other, people don't talk about. So again, clearly I'm passionate about this. I'm rambling on a bit, but it all just speaks to this dangerous mindset of seeing things as black and white,
Mm-hmm.
when the answer is, more often than not, somewhere in between.
Right. And how would you urge the younger generation out there? Uh, how should they filter the noise that is there on the social media? And they might be following a totally different narrative, which is not even closer to the truth. What would you advise them at this point of time? Because they are not a part of the industry yet, but they have so much negativity surrounding the whole landscape thrown before them on social media. What should they really look into and try to understand?
I think one of the most effective approaches to maybe get past the noise of social media, as you put it, is to engage one-on-one
Mm-hmm.
with people in private settings.
Right,
So find a handful of people. And again, I mean, thanks to the beauty of LinkedIn, you can find a handful of people to reach out to and say, hey, can I pick your brain for 10 minutes?
right,
Because when you're speaking with an individual who doesn't have to worry about the polish of their words that are going to be seen on social media, when you're dealing with the vast majority of people who, aren't on these extreme ends, you're going to get some insights from people who, again, are experienced and knowledgeable that are probably closer to the truth. And, a 15-minute conversation with somebody who's been, in the industry or who clearly has had some exposure to both sides of the story, you're going to get a lot more than 10 hours of scrolling. And again, parallels with politics are very much the same. That you certainly have plenty of voters on one extreme or the other, but the people making the decisions are the silent majority, if you will, those independent people. And the more you engage with them, the more you understand the real problems, the potential for real sustainable solutions, and the easier it is to cut through the noise that's out there on social media, or again, when it comes to politics, on billboards and television ads and radio ads. And so that's what I would encourage: is find some people, reach out. I mean, I know very few people in my career, if any, that wouldn't be happy to have a brief conversation with somebody
right,
that's not asking for anything other than a
right.
conversation, especially if you're asking somebody to share what they know and what they think. For the
Absolutely.
most part, and I think this is probably all of humanity, but certainly oil and gas industry, people are very excited to share, what they know and what they've seen. And, if you can engage some of those people and ask good, honest questions in a private forum, uh, I think people will be amazed how much more clarity they can get and how much easier it is to make an informed decision instead of relying on, again, choosing one side or the other, which is not, sustainable and is not healthy.
Absolutely. And I would definitely urge our viewers to connect with you as well on LinkedIn if they haven't connected yet, and try and engage with you in a conversation around this subject, because there's actually so much confusion and ambiguity around this whole topic. And there's very little positivity and a lot of negative, environment around this whole aspect. Moving on, Joe, if we talk about COVID 19, this is not the first downturn that the industry has experienced. We know how volatile our landscape is, how unprecedented it can get. This is just one of them, or maybe, there is more to come. But if we talk about some of the core elements that define this industry, according to you, what really helps this sector get through all of it?
I think there's collectively a sense of pride in what, again, the industry has done for not just the last 10 or 20 years, but,
Mhm.
for well over a century. And I think, like anything, you always bet with a streak. So, universal rule: if a team's won 10 in a row, well, they're not due to lose that 11th game. You bet with a streak that they're going to keep winning. And I think from a financial standpoint, you could argue that oil and gas hasn't exactly been winning over the last 10 years. When you look at public companies and what's happened there. But I think when you look at just the years of innovation and the years of progress, the years of contributions to society, there's a sense of pride there. And there's a sense that, yeah, the industry is undoubtedly going to be smaller and consolidated. But, for the most part, the things, the hard work, the innovation that has gotten us to this point, they're not going anywhere. It might be at a smaller scale, sure. It might be more efficient, great. But, you have to look back, even if you haven't lived through it. Things that happened in the industry, well before I was born, are still, you can pick up a book or read an article and say,
Yeah.
wow, I mean, these are some people that really took some risks. And I mean, risk taking, educated risk taking, at least, is something that should be lauded. And I think the people that appreciate that and realize that no matter what it looks like, the energy industry isn't going away.
Right.
And once you understand that, no matter how big, this, well, sure, this is the worst downturn there's ever been, or people have seen in their lifetimes. Fine, but it's still, it's a downturn.
Right.
And the magnitude of the scale doesn't take away the foundation that the industry has been built on, which again, hard work, innovation, sacrifice, and making a real impact on humanity, which again, I don't think can be overstated.
Absolutely.
So again, long-winded answer, but I think a bit of history for younger folks who are looking at this and saying, I don't want to, it's not something I want to touch. Some history can be helpful, even if it's not directly applicable, and even if the landscape looks a bit different than it has before.
Yes, absolutely. And on this note, how do you look back on your journey, and what are some of the milestones that you look forward to?
I look back on the journey with tons of gratitude. Certainly before I entered the industry, to have had a good, solid foundation in terms of my family life and my upbringing, and to have had an education, and again, as we talked about earlier, to have sort of lucked into the industry. I have nothing but gratitude. Once I was in the industry, to have had the opportunities that I was able to take advantage of, to have been surrounded by very good leaders and very, very good teams of people that supported me when I was in leadership positions. Nothing but gratitude, to have gotten to this point. And as far as milestones and looking forward, I think the biggest milestones that I'm anticipating are, as I work with a lot of individuals one-on-one, seeing them really, not just move into leadership positions, but sustain the momentum that they're starting to pick up now. And, I know I need to be patient in some cases. There's no shortage of short-term victories, but, I think the milestones I look forward to are when, somebody's coming back to me in 5 or 10 years and saying, wow, the conversation we had, the framework we laid out, that's really made an impact, and I wouldn't be where I am today. That's there's my why, right? I mean, it's being able to hear that. The short-term successes, yeah, that's fine, but those aren't milestones. Those are again short-term motivators maybe, but the real milestone is the person that I work with that comes back and has done great things, and maybe throws me a bone and says, I owe at least half a percentage point to my success to you, Joe. That's I think those are the things that I'm looking forward to most, Garima.
Wonderful, wonderful. And before we conclude, where can our viewers find the Energy Detox podcast? Please help them navigate through that and let them know. I will make sure that I put the links there in the description, but please tell them about it. Where can they find your podcast?
Sure. Well, the podcast is on all the major podcast hosts. You can go to theenergydetox.com, and all of the episodes are there, as well as transcripts and additional resources. And from there, you can learn a little bit more about Witting Partners and the work that I do as an executive coach as well. To the extent that some of those themes in coaching tie into many of the themes that are discussed in the Energy Detox. So, and as you mentioned earlier, certainly welcome feedback, suggestions, requests, criticism, and all of that can certainly be done through the website or via LinkedIn as well, to the extent people want to connect and offer feedback there.
Right, right. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining me today. It was wonderful speaking with you, understanding your journey, your unique inspiration behind what you do and why you do it with so much passion and enthusiasm. And I wish you all luck for the road ahead. And I'm so glad that I got an opportunity to connect with you today. It's an honor for me. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. This has been a pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to share my passion and thoughts. And again, I appreciate everything that you've done here with the Dais and these conversations. So thank you again, Garima.